All right, so I'm going to call this meeting to order at 3:06 p.m. But before we begin, the SFSS respectfully acknowledges its location on a traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including Musqueam, Squamish, Swallowtooth, Coquitlam, and Catsi nations. Unceded means that these territories have never been handed over, sold, or given up by these nations, and that we're currently residing on occupied territories. To learn more about the territories you reside on, if you are not on board of campus, like I am today, feel free to use nativeland.ca to learn more about the territories you reside on. We can move on to item number 3, which is the roll call of attendance. When I call on your position, please state your name, pronouns, and access needs. I will start off. Hi, I'm Judith. I go by she, her pronouns, and all my access needs are met, but I am super jittery because I had so much coffee today. I am gonna move on to ex officio, the president, but she is not here today. So I will move on to VP Finance and Services.
Hi everyone, my name is Abby. He, him pronouns, and all my access needs are currently met. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mathematics counselor.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben, pronouns he, him, and all my access needs are met.
Okay. Psychology counselor.
Hi, my name is Mark, pronouns he, him, my accessibility needs are met.
Amazing, thank you. Society of Arts and Social Sciences.
Hello, my name is Hillary. You can call me Hill. She, her pronouns. All my access needs are met.
Awesome. Let's move on to our society staff. Policy, Research, and Community Affairs Coordinator.
Hi everyone, my name is BT, pronoun she, has. I'm doing other tasks, and also my internet is not that stable today for some reason, and my neighbor's dog is very sensitive to my voice, can hear me from any room and will start barking. So if that happens, pardon me.
All good, BT. We are here for some cute puppies. Thank you for being here. Our administrative assistant. In the chat, hello, my name is Rianne, she, her pronouns. I'm in the sub right now, so Wi-Fi is a bit slow. I also can't connect my mic, sad face. I'm sorry, Rianne, but thank you for being here and let me know in the chat if you need something. All right, cool. That concludes our roll call of attendance. We can move on to item number 4, which is the consent agenda. It reads, be it resolved to adopt the consent agenda by unanimous consent. The only thing we have in the consent agenda today is matters arising from the minutes, governance committee minutes, in regards to the minutes we had from last governance meeting, which is the May 23rd minutes and the March 15th corrected minutes. So I'm gonna ask for unanimous consent. If you dissent, please raise your hand. Okay, all right, that's carried. We can move on to item number 5, adoption of the agenda. Be it resolved to adopt the agenda as presented. Can I get a mover?
VP Finance.
VP Finance moves. Can I get a second?
Math.
Math seconds. All right, this is now open to discussions. Do we have any amendments today? If you do have one, please list yourself in the chat. Going once, going twice. All right. Seeing that there's nothing to amend onto the agenda, I am gonna move to vote, and I'm gonna seek unanimous consent. If you dissent, please make your presence known. Seeing none, this is carried. So we can move on to item number 6, which is presentations. And we actually have a presentation today. 6.1, which is from me, Governance Annual Plan for the year of 2022 to 2023. I am unsure whether this is usually how it happens in governance, but this is how I decided to do it. So I am going to pull up the presentation and can go from there. All right, cool. I do want to just get my confirmation that people can see this. Awesome, great. I am really hoping that the sub Wi-Fi does not fail me today. All right, so full disclosure, I did upload a copy of the plan that is more in depth and actually talks about what we're going to be doing. This is just an overview in case to those who aren't in the committee and want to know something when they watch the video or something, or just so we can get an idea of what we're going to do. So as of now, we have identified a couple issues that we should be handling as governance committee in regards to reviewing, updating, and communicating those changes to the membership. And then potentially innovating and creating new policy that will ensure that we are not in the predicament that we are in today. So as many of you may know, policy review and reconciliation has been long overdue, mostly because the governance change that occurred kind of created issues where policy just wasn't updated because there wasn't time. So we're actually looking at policy that references old governance models, roles that no longer exist, and all that fun stuff, which makes our operations in the gray area most of the time. So our priority will be going towards updating our policies and ensuring that everything that's in them is actually applicable to our operations and that we can actually enforce them to make them actually compatible with the governance structure that we have right now, which leads into policy amendments. We do have some outdated language in some policies. We have grammar errors, we have procedural errors that don't match policy and bylaw. We have issues in regards to how accessible the language is, in regards to reading levels and actually understanding it for the general membership. We do have some policies and bylaw that almost requires like a doctoral degree to figure out what it means, which is not exactly great because we should be making our policies and bylaws accessible for the membership. So even those who are not like super in tune with politics or student government, they can still like look at it and kind of take away what the policy or bylaw says. And then we do have the bylaw review and updates, which in regards to preparing for the AGM that's coming up and deciding whether we can push everything through at the AGM or we need to look at doing it at the spring referendum. So preparing those recommendations, passing it on to members, meeting planning, and passing it on to council and just getting their go ahead. And then, of course, proactive policy change. So we have a lot of reactionary policies that have passed in the past 6 months, mostly because we had people exploiting policy loopholes and issues and quite frankly, sometimes ignoring policy right off the bat. So our goal is to make sure we have policy in place that outlines procedure, cases, and consequences if you breach them, which for some policies, we say that we don't allow for something, but we don't actually express what will happen if you breach it, which is an issue because at that point, how do you go about remedying the situation? So at this point, we're having to handle that. We are also have to potentially maybe create some policy because we do have some missing policy that disappeared from documents for whatever reason. So if we can find a draft language, that'd be great. We should also be moving to demystify society processes. It is very confusing from an outsider's perspective as to what we're doing and how we're doing it. And again, it just goes back to our policies and our bylaws just not being accessible in terms of how it's worded and how we operate within those boundaries. And then we just come back to offering that safety net that would ensure that next council and next exec down the line are not put in positions where they have to do almost like a legal analysis on the policy to figure out what it means and how it's actually applicable. And overall, just having that kind of consensus on what our policies actually are. So our first priority will be policy review. So you may be wondering, why are we doing this? The main reason for it is policy does have to be reviewed on a yearly basis to ensure that the changes that have occurred have been incorporated in policy, but also to make sure they are in line with our bylaws, the Societies Act, and other maybe provincial federal statutes. It's also to ensure that we are fine-tuning the language, that it actually makes sense, that it's efficient, that we don't have typos in them or misnumbering or all that fun stuff. So that's mostly why we review them, and that's mostly to ensure that when people look at the policies and bylaws, it actually tells them what they should expect in certain situations. We are also doing it now because we do have a backlog from the last council term. We do have a substantial backlog, unfortunately, of policies that need to be reviewed. And my personal goal is for us to wrap that up by the end of the summer semester. And obviously, it's just a consequence of the backlog. We gotta move quickly if we actually wanna work on new policy. We need to finish this first. Without knowing what needs to be changed in the current policies or what needs to be updated, we can't just jump into creating new policy because we might have to circle back to reviewing and fixing the current ones anyway. So I have classified at this point what our priorities should be. So something that should be handled ASAP is the election or referenda policies, mostly because that has actually began to be reviewed at the last governance committee from last council year. That's actually something that was in the process of review, so we should be finishing that up first. Also, that helps us to make sure we can hire our new IEC commissioners, so this has to be done ASAP. Corporate and records and information policies. Again, this needs to be wrapped up. We have a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of issues in that policy, ranging from roles that no longer exist are in charge of certain corporate accounts that I personally have not heard of, and to, for whatever reason, executives not having access to documents that are basically their portfolio. So reviewing that, making sure the language is updated and making sure that we can actually enforce that policy. Currently, we're actually violating our corporate policies. So looking into that and making sure that we can get things in line and start enforcing it will be priority. Council policies. We should probably, no surprise to anyone here, review them and make sure everything's up to date. Right off the bat, we know that there are a couple of things that are missing from it. We had two new committees that were created, Outreach and CCBC, that are currently not in the policies document. We also have some misnumbering in the policies document. We also have policy in there that doesn't explain how it's enforceable. So again, council policies, big priority. Privacy information management. So I'm not sure if it's just me, but the one on the website is a draft copy. So we probably want to track down the last updated copy and make sure we update that, because that also has outdated language in it. Based on what I remember, it talks about positions that no longer exist. No surprise there. And ultimately, it's just not a good look for us. We do have a section in there that talks about executive directors or EDs. We do not have one anymore. We have not had one for 2 years, or no, 3 years. So like that should probably be updated. Just on on the basis that we no longer have it. So who's in charge of it at this point? It's very unclear. My best guess, it would be a privacy officer, but it's not updated as of now. So that's something to look into. Member services and group policies, also something that should be updated, especially for our clubs and union sections. I think it'd be valuable to add in a appeals process and how that actually would work in regards to suspensions and what to do. Also just clarifying how the registration process goes, which I know many clubs run into that issue in the past 2 years. So just creating that template on how to actually register clubs and how to actually just make that policy clear. Faculty unions, I think it'd be valuable adding a section about levies, student union levies. We do not have a student union with a levy yet, but that is something that I heard some rumblings about. So adding it in preemptively and how that's manageable and how staff are to interact in these situations would be useful, I believe. And then orientation and retention policies, AKA my favorite. So a couple things are wrong with OTP, and I could go on for hours about it, but let's just start with the basics. OTP 2, it basically talks about board orientation, which arguably should be council orientation, which basically says that the incoming president is meant to basically lead the charge with the outgoing president on planning orientation. However, if you were part of the current exec, you will remember that you were told not to talk to staff, even though the policy outlines that the incoming president is meant to work with staff to ensure this happens. So a lot of contradictions going on in there, and how that's actually supposed to happen is not clear, and how you're supposed to plan this when you're not to talk to staff. Similar issue comes in terms of like just not establishing proper timelines that should be in there, whether it should be like by the 10th week of the semester, you should have X amount of info on counselors or something like that. That would also be useful to be added in, so we don't have new execs running around trying to chase down counselors 1 week prior to orientation, and not having those policies in place kind of leaves room to orientation and the transition itself being put on a back burner. It also comes down to just not having designated staff in the policy as who's supposed to work with who to make this happen. And maybe just adding a section of like basic topics that should be discussed in orientation every single year would be useful. Something simple as like review of society bylaws and policies and legal and these aspects that are really the bread and butter of being a director. So again, these have to be reviewed and make sure that we are not messing up the next year of counselors. And then we have a couple policies that I still think should be reviewed ASAP, but in terms of like priorities and making sure that society doesn't collapse. We have the IT policies, staff-led events, property management, incident support, office administration, personnel policies, and investment policies. The majority of these policies will require us to work with departments to make sure that they are aware of what's going on and that we're not changing something that will negatively impact them. But basically, these are the priorities, and we should probably get started on them. So in terms of policy review, we are looking at key concepts as in regards to make sure that we are not messing up the policies more than they already are messed up. So one of the obvious things is make sure it's actually consistent with our bylaws and the Societies Act. We should not let things that are inconsistent with our bylaws stay in policy because it just creates mayhem. Similar situation to Societies Act. And we should check if it's actually referencing the right bylaw, because we did go through a renumbering of bylaw, and if the policy wasn't updated, it could be referencing the wrong policy, the wrong bylaw number. And I personally have found many of those. So just reviewing that and making sure that we are not referencing the wrong policy, wrong bylaw when reviewing policy is important. Again, numbering. Is the number system set up correctly? Are we going from A to C instead of A to B? Do we have a missing policy that was removed? Or is it just a slight oversight? Just reviewing that, making sure that they're consistent is valuable. Terminology is in regards to, are staff titles consistent? Are we referring to staff that we still actually have? And is some of the terminology in reference to old governance models like the executive director position that we no longer have? And then of course, concepts. Does this policy actually make sense? Is this actually something that we can use for our governance model? Is this something that actually works? Is this something that's actually clear, enforceable, and is something that we can follow? If the answers to those are no, you should probably make a note of that. And in just general, just to make sure whether they're out of date or not is also valuable. Sometimes there were some policies that were fine in terms of content, but obviously we did have a lot of them based on what we uploaded to Drive that were absolutely wrong in so many ways. Which leads us on to policy amendment and what I identified right off the bat. And we should probably handle them as soon as we can, as we get to them. So again, we are back to me ranting about orientation retention policies. Super unclear, super inapplicable. If you think OTP2 is bad, I recommend looking at the rest. There are issues with OTP1, OTP3, just not being clear as to what the SOPs are, what the core curriculum should be for staff when we're training them. What are we referring to when we're saying society volunteers? Like, because we have union executives who are volunteering their time in society, do they count? There's also some outdated language about how training for volunteers is supposed to be done. So overall, a lot of issues with orientation and retention that we should probably fix before we start recruiting again and before we onboard too many staff so we don't confuse them. Corporate records and information policies, again, an absolute mess in terms of departments who are supposed to be involved that don't really exist, or department members who have different role names now, tracking down what those roles have transformed into, all these things. Member services and group policies, again, clarifying registration and suspension clause, student group levies, all these things. Privacy and information management, that's also an issue. That's probably the wrong text on there. SFSS retail services, we have missing policies. I'm not sure what happened, but we only have one policy in that document. I don't know whether my rest has gone, but they're gone. Council policies, in short, they're used most of the time. They're used a lot. And when it's inconvenient, they are ignored. So just making sure that there are enforceable mechanisms in council policies will probably help us down the line. So bylaw review and updates. What to expect? So this is more down the line for us, but this is basically a tentative timeline that we should hopefully stick to. So ideally by late June of, I guess, this month, or if we have to push it a bit, early July, we should be regrouping and reviewing as a group the bylaws in case those people were not super familiar with them. I can't blame you, it's not a fun read. And compared to our old bylaws for context and just to see if something was missed in terms of transfers and make sure the numbering is in line, and then start delegating bylaws to review, ideally 5 bylaws per person. Hopefully by early July or latest mid-July, we do have the review completed, and we can probably move on to suggestions and submissions to the committee as to what changes we recommend and like what language do we think would be best. Just preparing a recommendation package for members meeting planning committee, just so they can know what they can expect, probably by late July. And then submission of bylaw amendments to council for the AGM for approval, but also just so people have a chance to review them in time as a recommendation from governance and members meeting, hopefully by mid-August. That's my goal. We'll see how that's gonna go. And for a little context, AGM is supposed to be called 21 days in advance of the actual date of the AGM. And given that there's nobody elected from members meeting planning committee yet, it's just myself, I have chosen one date randomly, just October 26th. So the notice to membership will be going out October 5th, just for a little context. Obviously, this has to like pass through council. This is just my personal preference for date. And then hopefully by early September, we can help with the preparations and ensure that like everything is approved by council and everything is spell checked and make sure it's actually done correctly at the AGM and just prepare it for the agenda. But that's the tentative process and hopefully the timeline that we're looking at in terms of bylaw review and updates. I know that we have a couple of things in mind, so hopefully we can do it all at the AGM. If not, we have to probably look at a referendum. So again, a couple things that you could probably identify by looking at the policies right now. Bylaw 1. Most likely will be outdated by the time we're done with the policy reviews because we're most likely adding content into it or removing content if we have to. So that's actually just about interpretations. So we'll have to add like a couple of definitions in there. Bylaw 8, ambiguous. That's just all there is to it. Bylaw 9 is also ambiguous and open to abuse. People who don't know bylaw, 9 is in regards to, I believe, student union levies. So we probably want to clarify how that process is supposed to go. Bylaw 13 will most likely be added date once we're done with election and referenda policies. We also have a section in bylaw 13 that is worded very interestingly. That kind of like leaves it up to interpretation, whether it's saying that an SFSS executive officer loses their general membership to their DSU, or whether they just cannot hold a executive seat on the DSU. And it's not great that we don't exactly know by which one it is. Common sense dictates that it just cannot be an exec, but because the language is so interesting, it's not 100%, but that's the case. So just making sure that that's clear, that'd be great. Obviously, in terms of bylaw 13, just making it more concise in the bylaws and maybe more prominent in the policy, just purely on the basis that policy is easier to amend if it's need to be, while bylaw can only happen or can only be amended so many times. So just keeping that in mind. Bylaw 14, back to being ambiguous. Same with bylaw 15, which also open to abuse. Bylaw 25 has a massive grammar error and some typos. So these are the kind of things you should probably keep in mind when we're going forward. These are just a couple of things that really personally stuck out to me. I'm sure you guys have your own list of things that you probably want to change in there. So yeah. So we should have a couple of priorities, and I do understand that we are on a time crunch because we have catch up and we also have to try to at least create some new policy and make sure everything's in line. So at this point, I think our first priority should be just to reduce the required reading level for bylaws and policies. As of now, when I did a calculation on this, at the approximate reading level required to interpret our bylaw is grade 11. And just to give you some context, if you're applying for Canadian citizenship, you only need grade 4 level. So this is actually not great towards people whose language is not English, first language is not English, or any other reasons as to why their reading level would be lower than grade 11. So just making sure it's more accessible and more clear, more concise will probably help us in the long run. Priority 2 should be finishing up policy reconciliation, and which kind of ties into priority number 3, finishing a policy review, which we're also a year behind on. And then of course, adding in new policies that probably help us enforce current ones or just aid existing ones. And then just creating policy that ensures that we have a safe and welcoming environment in the society. This has actually been something that really bothered me personally, seeing the 2021 council suffer quite badly in regards to turnover. And the reason people were leaving wasn't necessarily always because of schedule conflicts. So just making sure that we're creating an environment where people feel safe and welcomed is probably should be top priority. And the best way we can enforce that actually happens is through policy, because people are afraid of policies. But yeah, and then of course, as a joke, I swear, priority number 6 is actually having governance meetings. I know that wasn't really the case last year, and governance committee was pretty stagnant. So just making sure we actually have these meetings probably will be good for us in the long run. But yeah. So again, the governance annual plan can be found in our Google Drive. But this is the basic overview of what we should be looking at. We are looking at a lot of cleanup, unfortunately. I wish I could tell you this is the year when we basically create all these fun policies. But at this point in time, our priority is to catch up and make sure that the policies that we do have are sound and are applicable to our infrastructure and how our society functions. So I'm going to stop screen sharing now. And I do want to open it up to questions if anybody has any. Should probably not do that. Yeah, questions? Go ahead, Abby.
Not so much a question, more a comment to the section where you mentioned making sure council is a safe environment to speak. I can speak to that as I was a counselor last year. There are plenty of times where I know myself and other counselors who messaged me didn't feel safe to voice their opinion at council last year for a variety of reasons. So I really appreciate you addressing that. And hopefully we can create a better environment for people to work together this council year. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. It was one of the reasons I ran for exec was because I was very unhappy to see a lot of people suffer in regards to how things are handled. And I don't want that for people. This is ultimately student government. Like, this is not world politics. This should be pretty simple in regards that we're here to help students. And most of the time, students just want events. They don't care about our petty little infightings. So making sure that we actually just keep to that goal and making sure that we actually just do what students want versus what we think they want. Okay. Anybody else have anything else? Yes, go ahead, Abby.
Sorry, just to follow that up, totally agree with you. It's about representing the students, not pushing our own agenda.
Yeah, so hopefully you can do that. Again, sorry if people are trying to do all these fun policies. Hopefully we will have time. The reason I want to wrap up reviews this summer semester is to make sure that we can actually do other stuff in the fall and December, and then basically the new year until turnover comes around again. But again, we can't get started on that until we wrap up this. Go ahead, Beatty.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the presentation and thanks for prioritizing this. I tried last year, but as you've mentioned, I think I only attended very few governance meetings, and there were more of specific policies and all that. So I'm excited to work with the team, and I'm looking forward for us revising all this. And I think it will work if we meet frequently, and then also if we are unable to meet, you can just make use of working documents that you can share. I think, Judith, you have the, what's the name, the tracker, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, and then so thank you for prioritizing this. And I also agree with you about plain language. I just finished a course on that, coming from a background of academia, doing research. So I'm also excited to apply how we can revise our policies to have plain language, to include different literacy level, include the big number of students whose English is not their first language, including me. Yes, the bylaws are sometimes really hard to interpret, but I'm excited. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And those of you who weren't around in the spring, Beatty was basically carrying the team on her back in the spring semester. I remember that because I attended a governance meeting during my transition. So I'm very excited to still have her on this team and be willing to put up with our shenanigans. So again, thank you, Beatty, and I'm very excited about the course you took. So that will be really cool for us to apply and make sure that people actually understand on what principles we're trying to operate on. Does anybody else care to add anything? If not, that's good. We can probably move on to discussion items. Cool. So 10.1, electronic voting, a review from, awesome, thank you, Beatty. A review from 2021. So just as a little background, I know I cut this item from the agenda last governance meeting. That was mostly because I did not have the information on it. I couldn't find anything. So here's what we do know. So it appears that this discussion happened at a 2021 governance meeting where they decided to start a working group that was going to look into electronic voting for council. So based on my understanding, and this is just purely on the fact that I have found absolutely nothing in my drive, this working group probably didn't keep minutes or just didn't get anywhere. I do know that there were discussions with some of our staff who were tasked to looking into it. I'm not sure if they found anything. It appears they haven't. So your girl did a little Google search to figure out what we can do about this. And I have some interesting news. So there is a software that is compatible with Zoom, which is yay, because our meetings are on Zoom. It's called Election Buddy, and it is pretty good from what I can tell. It is a paid subscription service, but it basically it's basically how I understand it works. It's kind of similar almost to like an iClicker, but it's on your laptop. It tracks votes. It tells you who voted which way. There is email support, so if something goes wrong, we can probably get somebody on the line ASAP. So there are apparently solutions to this situation. There are also different unions apparently that use it. I can actually start naming them if we want to. Apparently there's the Professional Association and Industry Association that uses it, Homeowners Association. In terms of unions, we have a couple of them. Honestly, I'm gonna name a random one. Let's go with American Federation of Musicians. I don't know why, I think that's funny. So a couple of unions do use it. It appears some schools actually use it. as well, like U of T, not U of T, Thompson River. Go ahead, Beatty.
So you did make a research request, but
Yes.
Angel works Tuesdays and Thursdays. So she has a draft right now that might have info that you need. I wonder if you want me to just share that. It's a working document. It's the very first draft. It just has info. We haven't made it into a briefing note yet. So I can share that with you, and then you can share that with just with you. Then when she's done, then we can share it with the team. Is that
Awesome.
okay?
Sounds great.
Okay, I'll send it to your email.
Awesome.
Okay.
Would it be okay for me to talk about it now, or do we want to wait till next governance meeting?
No, you can talk about it now.
Awesome.
Okay.
Oh, there it is. The lagging is, I love Gmail lagging. It's very funny. Okay, so I am gonna do my best here. So it appears that we have types of virtual voting tools used by student unions and board and councils in Canada and the US. We have simplyvoting.com, which is a full service provider of secure hosted online elections. So the first customer was Student Society of McGill University. Ooh, McGill. And it appears over 4,000 organizations use it. That's amazing. So used across various educational institutions such as the University of Minnesota, Grand Canyon University, Oakton Community College, McGill. We have Francophone Education Authority of British Columbia, Capilano Students Union. Ooh, okay, that's close to us. And then UBC almost mass. Okay, but it looks like AMS also has something cool. Do we want to just get AMS to help us? McMaster Students Union also has it. MSU. Okay, cool. And then yeah, election buddies here as well. So yeah, okay, cool. There are a couple of solutions. Use. Oh, this is actually still in detail. That's so cool. Thank you, Beatty and Angel, if you ever watch this. Thank you. All right, so we have some options here. Obviously, these will most likely be paid subscriptions, but as counselors here know, committee elections, the way we do it, the archaic method we are forced to use are arguably worse than us potentially paying $100 a year. So I think we can obviously circle back to this and see if we can actually push a recommendation for council to potentially use this. Obviously, we would probably need a policy change in the meantime to ensure that we can use online voting methods. Maybe a bylaw amendment down the line, which I guess I didn't mention at presentation, but it is in the actual annual plan that we should probably have some sort of electronic voting going on for council just to make things more efficient and make sure we don't take up 3 hours doing committee elections. So yeah, Helen, go ahead.
Thanks, Judith. I just wanted to say that as the chair of council and as someone who has lost sleep over how terrifying it is to have to run these committee elections on the fly and so inefficiently for time and also counting and tallying votes. Abby, I think you know how I feel on this for the past 2 meetings. I would highly recommend that the governance committee meeting look into this further so that we can create a more efficient standard while doing election committee meetings and councils. So thank you for bringing this up, Judith. I think I'm going to sleep peacefully tonight, knowing this.
I'm glad, Helen. Is this a bad time to tell her that we're doing committee elections again?
Oh, I'm not sleeping at all these next 2 days. So I know.
Go ahead, Ben.
I agree as well with what Helen said as to the convenience of electronic voting. The one thing I would say that we should look at is also how easily we can ensure that people that are voting at a council meeting are actually councillors, because we do have members of the public in attendance at these meetings.
Yeah, for sure. I think I can only speak to the software I've seen. Based on what I understand, there is a special URL created for the person you're sending the link to. So as long as we're sending it to people's council emails in the council meeting, ideally speaking, it should only go to councillor and will not work for others. But it's a very good point. We don't want voter tampering. So imagine 40 people in the call, but somehow 100 people voted. But Abby listed, go ahead, Abby.
Yeah, I concur with both the chair and vice chair of council. I also, something we tried last year for one election was we sent the links to people's emails specifically. Now, obviously that link can be copied and shared, so it's not perfect, but if you have some sort of, I know it's kind of hazy with what you can collect. Like, I think if you have like one of those sliders and you can select which counselor you are, if you see duplicates, then you know there's fraud, and if there isn't, it's probably okay, but obviously that's not perfect, but that's just a potential suggestion if we needed something electronic voting going forward before we came up with a permanent solution.
Yeah, for sure. Those of you who weren't at council last year, I do remember this one council meeting I was in, I think in January, I want to say. It was a governance committee election to fill, I think, 2 seats, I want to say. There was an issue in regards to that because I do know that they used the web survey link, and yeah. So yeah, let's just, my priority is just making sure that we can actually vote electronically. Obviously that is a very important thing, and I know other student societies also ran into this issue recently. So just making sure that we can actually do it would be good. And I am cautious about starting up a working group again, because that did not go well last year. So I think we keep it with the committee to make sure we're actually staying on top of it, and making sure that doesn't just disappear into thin air. As many of you know, working group meetings don't have to be recorded, and you don't have to take official minutes for it. So it's very easy to slack off and just have working groups go silent. So while we're having Zoom recording, will keep us relatively accountable to make sure we actually follow through on this. But once we have the briefing note ready to go on this one, I will share with the committee and we can probably go from there. But this is exciting stuff. Hopefully, if we ever have to fill committee seats again, because usually sometimes we do throughout the year, people resign, people leave. Hopefully the next time we're doing it, we can do it electronically. That would be super cool. But yeah, again, thank you, BD, and thank you, Angel, for putting this together and actually doing the legwork on this.
No problem. You're welcome.
This is exciting stuff. Before I move on, because I rambled on long enough, anybody else care to add anything? If that's no, that's fine. We can move on to 10.2. Policy review check-in. Hey, I'm sure people have been excited about this. So I just have our assignment Google Doc pulled up real quickly right now. So, okay, first off, thank you to everyone for signing up to review at least one policy. That's so good. We can actually work through more of them than if it's just like me on a Sunday night at like 2 a.m. going through them by myself with like one brain cell to my name. So this is good. It kind of also gives like a second eye on issues, so it's really great. If you pull the doc, you will see we have a lot of red, and red is action required. So I can speak to the policies I reviewed. Most of the issues on my end were in regards to outdated language, policy that wasn't exactly in law with our bylaws. So obviously, before we sign off on them, we do need to have those changed. It's actually very funny. I was pulling up some meeting minutes, I want to say from November, and that was the meeting where council basically called for the general elections for executives. And in the motion, they referenced bylaw 15 instead of 13 to call the election. And I'm pretty sure it was because at the time VP Internal pulled up the election referenda policy. And in it, it says that you call it in accordance with bylaw 15, which is now bylaw 13. So it was actually very fun to watch council basically call an election based on the resignation and the impeachment policy. Oh, the irony. So again, these kind of things that I have noticed. We probably, it's fair to assume the ones that have actually required will need to be amended, and they will have to go through a notice of motion process. So after this meeting, I think those items that I think we are ready to push for maybe a notice, we could probably get them in line and start drafting those and start pushing them through council. And once we have those, send them to me so I can send it up to comms to make sure it's actually put on the website. So yeah. I'm also glad that we have some green on there that doesn't say that we need to do something with it. So it's always great. We can sign up on those, they're fine. Those policies that are currently marked as no action required is IEC 7 through 8, notice of election and referenda policies, CP 1, 2, 5, which is campaigning policies, and voting policy 1 through 2, CIP 2, CIP 3, and that's it. Those are the ones that are fine. The rest, not so much. Those people who missed the last governance meeting, we decided to basically start with election referenda policies, corporate records and information policies, and council policies. Of council policies, we only selected R4 and 5, and they all need fixing. They were picked on purpose. So I think, yeah, like regrouping on them and deciding what we're pushing for notices would be useful. But I hogged the mic long enough. If people wish to talk about their policies and what they think is good in them or something that's really, really bad in them, feel free. Go ahead, Addy.
Just a little thing for everyone. 2 things that I found out came up in mine as well that you could see in yours is certain responsibilities may be put on a certain role that actually belong to the VP internal, given it is a newer role. Some of those may be improperly allocated. For example, a lot of my policies had the VP finance serving as oversight for certain functions, when in the bylaws it specifically states those functions belong to the VP internal, so keep an eye out for that. Another minor typo thing is many of things will say VP finance. It should say VP finance and services. So just another minor typo thing to keep an eye on. But yeah, this is my first time doing a policy review and it's pretty fun. So I'm looking forward to doing some more.
It is kind of like a treasure hunt, honestly. So I just pulled up the folder that we have for election and referenda. So in terms of NP1, it refers to the board of directors. This should be executive committee. For NP3, subsection 2, the wording is very unclear, and it probably should just say no candidate is permitted to run for more than one position during the executive committee elections. That would be my preferable wording for it. It's more accessible and more concise, because the current wording is no person may be a candidate for more than one position on the executive committee a single election. It's a very convoluted way of saying you can only run for one position, which should be common sense, but again. There is a line in P3 subsection 3 that says proposed candidates must conduct themselves in line with SFSS values, bylaws, policies, and election rules and regulations. So that's something to keep in mind, because I think that would probably maybe more applicable in regards to enforcing a policy that was actually removed from NP3, which is in regards to candidates who are elected not being able to hold DSU, FSU, constituency group, ASG, and club executive seats. So maybe adding an amendment that would be 3 subsection A, as per bylaw 13.3, elected candidates cannot hold department union positions, faculty union positions, constituency group, or club executive seats concurrently to their SFSS officer terms. Might be useful to add in, just to remind people that you can't do that. So again, let a board of directors speak when it should be executive committee or council. Yeah, that's just NP 1 through 4. Election, referenda, structure and planning policies, keep referencing bylaw 15 when it should be bylaw 13. It references bylaw 16 subsection 3 when it should be bylaw 14 subsection 3 through 8. Not the same thing, folks, not the same thing. And then for bylaw 17 should be bylaw 15. So we do have this kind of like awkward situations, and I did catch a office of VP Finance instead of office of VP Finance and Services. For historical context, VP Finance used to be what the position was called with the old governance model. So these are just a couple of things. I know Ben also did a couple IEC reviews. Ben, you can take the floor on those if you like. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just honestly, one of the most notable changes that needs to be made is under IEC 9.5, where it seemingly treats our bylaws as optional to follow, which should be changed because there's no option there. And also just making some terminology. A big thing in IEC thing in IEC 1 and a few other policies is ensuring that terminology is in line with how we refer to it in bylaw. Here in for example, in IEC 113B, we say that electoral commissioners shall receive a stipend equivalent to that of half the executive board member. Nowadays, we call them executive officers, no longer executive board members. And some other things are about processes that have sort of taken place or should be taking place but have broken down in IEC 2.3. It says that the committee for the recommended appointment of the IEC shall give the president and the council at least once per week updates on the hiring process of the IEC. I was on council last year. To my understanding, this never happened. Also, there's the whole issue of the retainer agreement that was signed, and that, yeah, Also some references to society regulation and SFSS regulation. That should all just be called SFSS regulation. That's sort of the big stuff there. And then for on council policies, you will see I have a lot of comments on both R4 and R5. One big thing on R4, we technically deduct your stipend twice if you fail to attend a council meeting because there's a typo in the committee arrival rule. There's also some interesting changes that we may want to discuss to how acting executives need to file exit reports and semester reports. Other than that, on R5, sort of the big things there is, just in my view, we should create an appendix to the document that outlines some examples of when R5 is applicable and cases in which it is not. Also, under a interesting interpretation of R5, we run into some issues with non-counselor members on committees and the applicability of R5 to them, because technically we have staff that are members of society committees, and some of these rules don't make much sense in context of staff.
Sure. I'm sorry, folks, for laughing. I just imagine like a chart for R5. Like, is this an R5 violation? Oh my gosh, it's like an actual checklist of like, did you do this? You have violated R5. We're censuring you. But thanks for the update, Ben. This is a very thorough review. I think we will have a great time applying these changes. In the chat, Ben says, I'm thinking similar to like appendix on SFU student conduct policy as an example. Yeah, for sure. This would be fun for us to do. I know last time we spoke with council about R5, they were very fascinated by it, so this will be great. And then the other policies that we reviewed were the corporate policies. I uploaded mine twice, of course I did. Okay, let's figure out which one's the most updated copy. So based on what I remember, the biggest issues for corporate policies on my end, because I did 1 through 5, were in regards to how people had access to record types. For example, we had, I think most jarringly personally, Constitution and bylaws. And he said read access council, all staff, fine. Execs are part of council. And then write access was for operations organizer and research and policy coordinator, which first off, we have Beatty here today. She's also community affairs. So that's her role is outdated on there. And also arguably, given the fact that many of these processes are meant to be overseen by the VP internal to make sure they don't break down, it's kind of weird that it doesn't have writing access to any of the executives, not even the president. Similar issues for majority of them, of roles just being outdated. For whatever reason, VP Finance does not have writing access to the audited financial statements. And what else? Oh yeah, we have a role here that no longer exists. Build SFU General Manager. Don't have that anymore. And my assumption that's the building manager now, I assume. But we no longer will build SFU General Manager. There's also some inconsistencies. Where is it? Oh yeah, for BC registry filing, it says read access, president, council. President is part of council. Why is it separated when they have basically the same read function access? I don't know. My assumption is because the old governance model, council was only an advisory body, not because of that separate. So keeping that up to date and just saying council probably would be useful. But yeah, again, BD's role is messed up in this document. In terms of functioning, there are some issues, but they're more minor ones. It's mostly just how it's allocated in terms of what staff or what managers meant to oversee what. That is mostly jarring and quite frankly wrong. We also run into issues where some executives are meant to oversee certain processes to make sure they don't break down. But based on my understanding, majority of us do not have access to any of these things. So, because majority of these records are supposed to be on the SFSS file share, we don't have that anymore, or I don't have access to it, and neither does anybody else on this exec team. And based on what I heard from certain people, this has not been used for like at least 2 years, which is not great, to say the least. But I know Abby did 6 through 10, so I'm going to hand it over to him to share his thoughts.
Thank you, Judith. So starting from CP6, it's already kind of, they've tried to go back and fix it. Like there's a lot of crossed out lines already. So someone clearly saw this was messed up to begin with. There's a couple of typos and all that, such as the VP Finance and Services issue, just general grammatical issues. There's also a lot of stuff in here that's not referenced specifically in the bylaws that might be worth seeing if it's worth updating it, like a lot of roles and stuff, a lot of stuff that the IEC chief have to do and staff have to do that isn't in there. As for CPS, can't speak today. CIP 7, it just generally doesn't make much sense because both the board president being in charge of this and the VP Finance being oversight doesn't really make sense, considering leases is under the sorry, just wasn't in chat. Don't make sense because it's under the VP Internals portfolio according to the bylaws, so that doesn't make sense. As far as CIP 8 is concerned, it's the same issue with the VP Finance serving as oversight. That's the VP Internal that has to deal with the meeting minutes in particular. CIP 8 is, or CIP 9, sorry, is just a little bit weird as well. As the organizational charts, again, have nothing to do with the VP Finance and Services. And CIP 10, audited financial statements. The president is the oversight for that, which again, doesn't make any sense. It should be the VP Finance and Services. So it has a lot to do with the oversight, and some of the content as well could be overhauled. But yeah, the biggest thing is the oversight, given that there was the change in roles for the VP Finance and for VP Internal. That seems to be the common theme amongst all of them. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And again, some historical context. If you look up what the VP Finance's role actually was before this whole shift, VP Finance was basically the workhorse of the board. They were basically doing everything. And I guess my role basically almost like came out of that one. So, which is why a lot of these old documents are referencing VP Finance, VP Finance, VP Finance, because at the time there was no VP Internal. So let's just take a load off of Abby's plate and put it onto mine because it's supposed to be on my plate. But thank you for that summary. And the last thing I would go over is the campaigning policies, because we did go, well, supposed to go over them. And I did want to add a couple of things and highlight a couple of things. One of the biggest feedbacks we did have is like clarifying online campaigning and what to do with online content after a campaigning period closes. Obviously, adding in that you can't campaign during voting period, because that was actually feedback we got through BD's report that people didn't like that. Crazy concept. Majority institutions do not allow for campaigning during voting period. It's a ethically gray area. Also, if you look at other election styles, especially, for example, SFE Senate, they don't allow any sort of campaigning during voting period. So just following that kind of almost common sense mentality and adding it into policy might be good. I know this was an issue this election season, and I think council voted, I believe, to let people campaign during elections. I think, if I remember correctly, either way, poor choice. So just adding in that we can't do that, taking off online content during voting period. I know we had discussions at the old governance committee that what to do with like website platforms and what to do with the website itself. Like, do you have to take the whole website down, or do you just take down the portion of the website that contains the campaign material? So just clarifying these aspects might be useful. Defining active versus passive campaigning. For example, passive campaigning would be basically not posting anything during voting period, but leaving up your like campaigning post on your social media accounts or leaving up your platform, because people can still find it. It pops up on their recommended, maybe somebody sent it to them. So if you leave things up, it's kind of like the online equivalent of leaving your posters up, but not campaigning. So adding in language about that. A comment that I made, and I think this is on, yeah, CP3, is about society resources shall not be used for campaigning. So a couple of things. We have a campaigning coordinator who is supposed to campaign for our referendums. She's society staff. We have to make some exceptions for our people who are supposed to campaign to make sure referendums do hit quorum. Just making it clear that they cannot campaign for one side over the other, but campaign on like making sure that people vote. That'd be great. Another issue is just clarifying what society resources are, because arguably society clubs, unions may also count as a resource because they get funding from them and they're under the SFSS. Are they allowed to campaign on behalf of a candidate? Right? So just keeping that in mind. There is another comment that I know Beatty's report was referring to in regards to keeping executive officers out of elections to make sure things are fair and there isn't a bias going on. And there's a reference to it in CP3 subsection 17. The SFSS council as a body or the executive committee of the body may not endorse any candidates or any group of candidates for any election within the society. Endorsements can be made by a counselor in their private capacity as a student and a member, as long as society resources are not used. So I think there is an argument to be made that maybe we should just have any person who's currently serving on council during the election time not be allowed to campaign, because it is a bias, but we are in the, it is a question of whether it's enforceable. I don't necessarily think it is, but go ahead, Abby.
I was gonna say exactly what you said. There's no way to tell, like right now, at least you can kind of tell who's saying what, but there's nothing stopping from someone to just make a fake Instagram account, make a fake Reddit, whatever, and just say what they want to say. So there isn't really much point in that because it's not enforceable.
Yeah, it's just, there are those elements where like it would be a good idea, but can you actually follow through on them is kind of a different concern. Go ahead, Beatty.
Just I agree with what all of you are saying, and also just to add up, a part of the problem from the staff side is the instructions of different interpretation on what to do based on exec's mood and exec's position. So that was the real issue. And it also just happened because at that time, all the staff that were in charge of the election, so communication, campaign, myself, it was our first election. So the other election I was just a research assistant. So that also kind of influenced their decision making and also influenced their power to kind of just instruct staff. And then we were left in a position where, well, it's my first time, probably they're right, but also the police. So that's where we wanted like to have a limit on just not to keep giving staff different policy interpretation based on their political side of the situation.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think having that kind of clarified for staff specifically, like again, for people like BD, campaigning and communications, just so they have a strict understanding of what they can and cannot do, because ultimately they're the ones who stay here longer. Executives, council, they rotate out almost on a yearly basis. So it is important they have that institutional knowledge, so they know what has happened and how to do things. And from a personal bias, I don't necessarily think executive or council per se should have much say in how elections are run and when things are posted and how things are posted and how instructions are to be given, because people who hold elected positions have a stake in the game no matter what. So I think just clearing things up for staff will be useful. Maybe that's also something we can put into SOPs later. I don't know if that's something we can do, BD, but yeah. Just to make sure people know what's going on. And if there's a turnover in terms of staff, like maybe some staff leave, new people come in, that they're not overwhelmed and relying on the executive to tell them what to do. So, yeah. Any thoughts, comments on this before we move on?
I had one more comment. I don't know if, okay, let me just say it. So, but after all of you have reviewed it and you've taken it, or before you even take it to council, I'll just send an example of the next step. I don't know why it's not allowing me to enter. I hope it will. So one request is that if you have that policy recommendation change, if you can take it to council with the exact wording. One reason is that some council members might want to revise the wording, so just debate around it. So after that debate or after the council has passed, then it means if there's a word that has been changed, you'll need to again send another copy to me when you're sending your work order with the exact wordings, exact numbering that you need. So I'm just trying to tap in the example, but it's not allowing me to, but let me give it a try again. So you can see. There you go. Okay. Yeah, so this is an example of a policy change before I send it to Ilham. So if you send it to Ilham directly, she'll be mad at me. Because like, what do I do? So please send it to me first. And this is an example. I'll share other previous work order to the members so that they can know how to go about it, and also share an example of bylaws numbering. So how you'd instruct me to do it. I'll share the document of the previous work order on that, just to make sure that I don't miss anything in your change, because I might miss it in one way or another. Okay, just a simple request on how we'll, after the approval, then how we go about it after that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. That's a good point. I hope that they won't want to change anything. Yeah. I think it'll be interesting. I know some counselors, just based on what I saw, how they submit notice of motions are very different. Some people just say, refer to this doc. And I think some motions actually do outline like what is being changed. So, yeah.
Okay. We'll figure it out anyway. No big deal.
Yeah.
It's the first time, so we are here to just support each other and make it work.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Speedy.
No worries.
Okay, so I think we should move on really quickly to 10.3, which is campaigning policy review. So I know maybe people didn't get around to doing that. I did share the document with everyone here. So if I could ask folks to have a look at that document, it's called Campaigning Policies. It was shared with your SFSS email, and give some feedback on it. I added CP7, which is the slates, because I know we talked a lot about slate last governance meeting. So if folks could add some feedback on that, that would be awesome. I went through it myself and highlighted the things I personally think are good or should be revised. So others can do that too. So it's not a unilateral Judith and Beatty decision. That'd be great. But yeah, so please do review that and just circle back to it soon. Anybody have any questions about campaigning policies, or I can send the link to it again. Oh, I actually see Mark is on here. Hi, Mark. Barring any questions? Good? No? Feel free to add your feedback on the side. And then we can move on to 10.4. Annual General Meeting, AGM, bylaw review. You thought we were done with reviews. You were wrong. We are most likely gonna move on to bylaw reviews as well. I know I just showed you a tentative timeline we should be operating on in terms of bylaw review, but I do want to put it on everybody's radar here that we will be also getting started on that soon, mostly to ensure that we do stay on track. So this will most likely be happening in terms of walking through the bylaws at the next governance meeting, just to ensure that people know what our bylaws are, how to access them on the website, the comparison between the old ones and new ones, what was changed from the last AGM, what was not great. Oh, there's a comment in the chat. I'm going to read it out quickly. One big thing is we need to strike the word "the" in about 20 places. That's very true. There's a lot of random "the's" around in the sentences that don't exactly make sense. So just going through those kind of grammar spelling checks and also looking at the content. But that's a 2-week in time governance problem. But I do want to put on people's radar in case you have some downtime and you want to look at the policy, the bylaw. God, I'm VPIOD, I should not be mixing the two up. So if you have time, have a look at it. If not, we will be doing a comprehensive overview of it at the next governance meeting so we can start delegating bylaws to folks. My count is that we have 5 members. We can do 5 each, so it's not overwhelming for everybody. But yeah, ideally we will have the review completed either early July or mid-July. So based on that, we can move forward with recommendations and see how much change needs to be made. Usually we can push through spelling and grammar issues really easily based on what I've seen at previous AGMs. Those usually pass usually without any issues. So I know I just showed you my grievances with the bylaws. So you can tell it's not just spell check that we need to do, but yeah, hopefully there isn't too many issues that we don't overwhelm the AGM agenda. But yeah, I do want to get going on that because the AGM technically is around the corner. So yeah, but I do want to open this up to questions, thoughts. Okay, if there isn't any, that's all good. We can probably circle back to this again next meeting just to make sure everything's done. And yeah, I think that's all we have. So barring on any comments, I am gonna move to adjournment. So be it resolved to adjourn this meeting at 4:31 p.m. Can I get a mover?
VP Finance.
VP Finance moves. Can I get a second?
Math.
Seconds. Is anybody in opposition to adjourning this meeting? If so, please make your presence known. Nope. All right. I guess this meeting is adjourned. Those of you watching on YouTube, have a great day. All right. Bye.